Welcome to the deep dive. So if you thought the founding of America was all pilgrims and, political ideals,
Mm-hmm.
well, we're looking at sources today that might make you reconsider.
Definitely. We're diving into material that presents a really different view. It frames the Virginia Company not just as a colonial thing, but as a corporate charter.
Yeah, like a blueprint. The sources keep calling it the American game,
Exactly. Our mission here is to unpack what these sources are saying that the New World was fundamentally corporate from the get-go.
and that the real ownership, the sort of hidden board of directors, wasn't who we think.
Right. The sources point to a secretive group they call the OK Club, claiming they've been pulling the strings all along.
Okay, let's try and unpack that. So the argument is the history we usually get. That's like the front office stuff, flags, politics.
Uh-huh. But these sources say, look at the incorporation documents, look at the legal structure. That's where you see the real owners.
A centralized global power, not just early capitalism, but like control.
Yeah.
So where do we even start verifying such a huge claim with this material?
Well, the sources suggest starting with the legal mechanics. If you strip away this sort of romantic story of colonization, what really defined the Virginia Company was its charter.
It's legal setup.
Yes, and the most critical piece of the argument, sort of technical linchpin in these sources, is how that charter structured accountability.
Okay. Normally we think of companies answering to, I don't know, the government, parliament, maybe the public. What do these sources say about the Virginia company?
Well, that's where they draw a really sharp distinction. They state the company was specifically set up not to be answerable to the public government, not Parliament.
So outside the usual checks and balances.
Exactly. The charter created this separate legal entity sort of outside the standard national rule.
That sounds significant, a big loophole. So if it bypassed Parliament, who held the reins? Who was the ultimate authority?
According to this source material, the authority came directly from something they call the Crown Corporation.
The Crown Corporation. Not just the crown, like the king or queen.
No, the sources interpret this as a specific private entity, an institutional body-wielding economic power separate from the public monarchy or the state.
And the claim is, this legal setup kept the whole venture out of public hands.
That's the argument. To ensure the new territory, this asset remained under private control.
Okay, and here's where this OK Club connection comes in, right? If the company answers to the Crown Corporation, what is that, according to these sources?
This is the absolute core connection the sources make. They claim the Crown, in this specific corporate sense, is actually the established institutional name for the inner circle of the OK Club.
So the hidden elite supposedly running the world.
That's what the sources allege, that this Crown Corporation is essentially their main vehicle for managing global assets.
Right. So this is where it gets really interesting for anyone looking at, say, global finance history or power structures.
Exactly. If you follow the source's logic that the Virginia Company reported directly to the OK Club's corporate arm, then the charter itself becomes, well, they call it a literal confession.
A confession.
Meaning?
Meaning it's proof. A mechanism set up by these players of the game, as the sources call them, specifically to build a new pillar of control.
On a whole new continent, dedicated only to their interests, not the public's or the settlers'. That's the interpretation presented. The structure itself is positioned as proof. It was an operation controlled by a hidden elite, not a national project. Designed for wealth generation, managed by the OK Club, kept at arm's length from any real government oversight. Okay, so the structure points to elite control. What about the people actually doing the work on the ground, the colonists? We usually think of them as, brave pioneers seeking freedom.
But the sources offer a much colder, more technical definition. They insist these people weren't legally seen as free settlers chasing liberty.
And what were they?
Legally, the company defined them as contracted servants.
Contracted servants, that phrase. It sounds very specific, very economic.
It is. And the sources don't downplay it. They call it a literal, undisguised description of the pawn system. A pawn system. Wow. So it shifts everything away from ideals towards just labor.
Pure labor mobilization, yes. The sources argued this legal status meant their job wasn't about freedom, it was about building the infrastructure for this new corporate territory.
They were what was the phrase? The first wave of pawns.
First wave of pawns sent across the ocean to build the infrastructure of the new game board in the Americas. That's the quote.
Pawns implies they were owned, disposable even. The sources are pretty clear that their lives, their work, everything they built, it all belonged to the company.
Reportedly, yes. Their existence, their labor, the infrastructure, all owned by the company and therefore, by extension, by this controlling crown corporation.
And the sources use some really strong language to drive this home, don't they?
Incredibly strong analogies. They refer to these settlers as the first inmates of the new American penitentiary.
The penitentiary, that's...
It's not presented as a moral judgment, more like an analogy for a closed system. Forced labor, extraction, where everything produced feeds the corporate owner no matter what the workers hoped for.
That comparison is pretty stark. So if the company legally owned the people and what they built, what does that tell you, fundamentally, about why the colony was set up?
It points entirely to finance, not politics or society building. An extraction system, pure and simple, built on legally owned labor.
Okay. So if the Crown Corporation, the OK Club, according to these sources, owned the labor, then where did the output go? Where did the wealth these contracted servants generated actually end up?
The sources are unambiguous on this. All profits were funneled directly back to the financial district, to the City of London.
The City of London, not just London generally, but the financial center.
Precisely. And according to these sources, this confirms the City of London's role as the operational and financial headquarters for this entire global game that the elites are supposedly running.
So the New World was designed from the start to be a farm.
A resource farm, yes, or even a penal colony. The sources state its single purpose was generating tangible wealth, gold, timber, resources, energy.
Which was then systematically sent back to what they call the ringmaster's central treasury. It's a provocative claim. The whole idea of the American dream was basically an asset owned and managed from the start by London bankers acting for the OK Club. That completely reframes the founding story, from independence to calculated resource allocation on a global scale.
It does.
And the sources connect this to other ventures too, right? The Virginia Company wasn't just a one-off.
Correct. If you look at the broader context presented, the sources claim the same Crown Corporation running the Virginia Company was also running the East India Company.
The infamous East India Company. And other colonial projects.
And many others across the globe, yes.
So these weren't separate national efforts competing with each other. In this view, they were more like corporate departments.
No. Exactly like that. The analysis suggests they were different corporate divisions with the same board of directors, just tackling different parts of the same global economic strategy, or GAME.
Okay, so how do they differ?
The sources differentiate them by their main function or theater of operation. The East India Company, for example, was focused on Asia, trade dominance, control.
They're called the Guardians of the Pacific Gate in the text.
Right. Whereas the Virginia Company, the focus of our deep dive today, its mandate was different. It was the builders of the new American pillar of control.
Focused on setting up this new extraction system in the West, a new resource stream.
Exactly. So according to the sources, it reveals this highly coordinated, synchronized global plan, all managed by a central, secret group of elites. The O.k Club.
It lays out a very comprehensive structure, doesn't it? From the very top, the controlling authority, right down to the legal status of the individual labor.
So just to synthesize what we've pulled from these sources, the Virginia Company was essentially the tool the elites, the O.k Club, used to construct the American part of their system from the ground up. The sources really frame it as a pure corporate venture. Using these indentured pawns, creating a resource colony, all the profits flowing back to the central bank in London.
And all operating under the legal authority of their private corporate government, the Crown Corporation.
That's the picture painted by the source material, yes.
What really stands out is the stark contrast. You have the traditional history, we all learn political freedom, self-determination, and then you have this interpretation.
Right, which presents the founding as purely profit-driven. A corporate extraction scheme run by a hidden elite who see people primarily as, labor capital for their global game.
And what's interesting is how the sources use the dry legal language terms like contracted servants from the charter itself to build this really vast theory about ownership and control.
It definitely forces you to look at the paperwork, rather than just the political narratives.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to consider. If the very foundation was based on this idea of contracted servants building infrastructure purely for an overseas corporate entity, what parts, if any, of that original pawn system structure might still echo in today's economy, especially when you think about complex contracts, labor, and who ultimately benefits from the infrastructure we all build and maintain now? Who really owns the output? Something to think about.